All right, welcome to Unit 4. We're going to get into the trigonometry of right triangles this unit. And so instead of putting the booklet in front of me at the moment, I am going to go through just some quick notes, some quick review on calculating the sine, cosine, tangent, as well as Pythagoras' theorem here for a quick moment with you. So last year or last semester, whenever you took Workplace 10, we went into the cosine, sine, and tan. And even before that, probably grade 8 and grade 9, you started to look at things like Pythagoras' theorems. So just going to draw a quick little triangle there. Right triangle, we would label this usually hypotenuse, the longest side, which happens to be across from the right angle. And then we either call these two legs, but for trig, we have to call them either hypotenuse or, opposite or adjacent. So if I was focused on that angle with that dot, actually, we'll just do a little angle sector there. If I'm talking about that angle, then the side across from it would be known as my opposite. And the side beside it is my adjacent. So I use the word adjacent because when two people sit beside each other, they're adjacent to one another. So if I had moved my angle to the other angle there, then the opposite and the adjacent would switch. All right, so if I'm using Pythagoras' theorem, so no angles involved, I'm not looking for an angle, and I'm just looking for a side, okay? So I'm just going to make a quick note. You might want to write some of this stuff down. So if I'm looking for a side, and I know two sides already, then I'm just going to use Pythagoras' theorem. So that's just going to be either my adjacent squared plus my opposite squared is equal to the hypotenuse squared. And you're going to see this go into effect right away here. I'm just going to write down the formulas more so than anything, and then we're going to put them into practice when we get into the examples. So if I'm looking for a side and I know two sides already, no angles involved, I'm just going to use that Pythagoras theorem. If I'm looking for, say, one of these, the opposite or the adjacent, I can switch around my formula. Other ways that I can write it could be opposite squared is equal to the hypotenuse squared. Take away the adjacent squared. Or if I'm looking for the adjacent, so it all just depends on what you're looking for. Are you looking for the hypotenuse? Are you looking for the opposite? Or are you looking for the adjacent in this case? Okay? So we're going to move into the trig function specifically, the sine, cosine, and tangent. So just move that up a little bit. So we know that sine of an angle is equal to the opposite over the hypotenuse. That's one formula or one value. The cosine is going to involve the adjacent over the hypotenuse. And the third one that we learned was the tangent is equal to the opposite divided by the adjacent. Okay, now there's different manipulations, so it depends on if you're looking for a side and you're given an angle and another side. Then you can do some manipulations there. So just gonna kind of bring this back. So if you're looking, make sure that's in there, looking for a side, and I know an angle and one side. Okay, so if I'm looking for a side, but I already know one of the sides and I have the angle given to me, then I'm just going to manipulate it. It just depends on if you're looking for an opposite, but you have hypotenuse, or the adjacent, but you have hypotenuse, or if you're looking for the opposite, but you have adjacent. So if you recall, we would just kind of go through, okay, I happen to know one of those. So we can do some manipulations, and like I said, I'm going to get into examples in a moment, but let's just kind of rewrite some of these. So say I'm looking for my opposite side. Well, that is going to be equal to my hypotenuse times the sine of my angle. Okay, if I've got that information. Okay, or if I'm looking for the hypotenuse, but I just know my opposite, then it's going to be opposite divided by sine. So the idea is I just switched my sine and my hypotenuse. Okay, and I can do the same thing with cos. So instead of opposite, we're going to use adjacent and change up the formula. So we've got hypotenuse times cos of an angle, or if I happen to be looking for the hypotenuse, but I have my adjacent and an angle, and then if I happen to have, my next thing would be the tangent, if I happen to be looking for the opposite, but I maybe know my adjacent. Or if I'm looking for the adjacent, I would set that up like that. Okay. Leave that there for a second. You can pause it if you'd like to take that down, put it on a cheat sheet or something like that, something that you can reference easily as you go. Okay. And the last part I'll just mention is if I'm looking for an angle and I'm given two sides. If that's the case, then what we're going to do with those formulas is just going back to the very original type of formula. If I'm looking for just the angle, but I'm given my opposite and my hypotenuse, what I need to do is divide my opposite and my hypotenuse. I'm going to get a 4-digit decimal value, and then I'm going to do the second function. So that's a shift button or a second function button on your calculator. On my calculator here, I would just push second and then sine, okay? Or I might go like 8, oh, it's not turned on. Maybe if I had 8 divided by 13, maybe my opposite side was 8 and my adjacent side, or my hypotenuse side, was 13. I've got a 4-digit number. I'm just actually going to keep all the digits on there. It's more than 4. And then I'm going to go second function sine. And I get 37.97. So about 38 degrees would be the angle for that right triangle. Some calculators, you might actually have to go second, sine, and then do the division. It just depends on the type of calculator you have. Alright, so back to just some quick notes there. So we're just going to manipulate that formula real quick so you have it in your notes. We would have sine to the -1, and we would have had to divide the opposite by the hypotenuse to get that. Okay, so do the division here first, and then the second function sine. We'll just do the same thing with our cos. So that's our angle, theta is equal to cos to the -1, so either second function or shift divided by hypotenuse. Again, you're going to divide those two numbers and then push your cos to the -1, or vice versa. Get your division, maybe write it down, and then put this before and then type in your 4 numbers. Or you can put brackets around it and do the division inside 2 brackets is fine too. Okay, and lastly, I already just made a mistake, but I don't edit videos, so we're just going to go over that. So theta, we're going to go tan inverse is opposite over adjacent. Alright, so now we're going to put this into practice. So I'm actually going to separate this into a different video so it doesn't make it super long. You can catch the next video if you go to the next link in your list, okay?